From the January 6th riots to the rise of the Omicron variant, 2021 has been a year filled with ups and downs, and politically speaking, a historical year for this country. While no year can beat the craziness of 2020, 2021 can say that it's in a close second place. Join me today as we take a look back month by month at some of the biggest political stories in 2021 and take a peek into what 2022 might have in store for us for 2021 Political Year in Review. Today, December 31st, 2021. From Anchor by Spotify, this is a special edition of the Ishan S. Show, 2021 Political Year in Review. With me, your host, Ishan. Welcome to this special edition of the Ishan S. Show. Thank you so much for joining me here today for our Year in Review special. If you're new to the show, let me just say welcome, but also that episodes are not generally this long. Today's our New Year's Eve special, so that's why it's an extra long episode. But I'm so glad that you could join us today. Now, 2021 has been a year filled with ups and downs, and I think this past year has just been so unusual and so interesting. But really, I think this past year has also been so amazing for the show. I started the show on June 4th. I mean, technically, the trailer came out on May 13th, but that's neither here nor there. But the fact is that ignoring everything that's happened this year, I do just want to recognize the sheer success and support that this show has gotten this year. And for that, I do want to take a few moments to just say thank you from the bottom of my heart for making 2021 the best first year a show can have. I know episodes do not come out nearly as often as desired, but I also have to balance a schedule of my own. And the support that you have shown and provided for that is phenomenal. So thank you. Now, enough with my thanks. You guys do get the idea. So I think we can now start with 2021 Political Year in Review. Now, to start things off, let's first take a look at the month of January. Arguably, of the 12 months this year, I think January has probably been one of the most important years in shaping politics this year. In fact, a few days ago, I was reading an NPR article which was talking about the 10 biggest events from 2021. And of those 10 events, if I'm not wrong, I think like 3 of them were just from January alone. So January, to start things off, was very important in shaping politics this year. So on New Year's Day, going in, President Biden had been declared the president-elect, Kamala Harris the VP-elect. And the House of Representatives, despite being so remarkably close, was in the hands of the Democratic Party. So that's 2 out of 3 of our political branches. So the third one, our third political branch, the Senate, was not decided yet. Going into New Year's, Democrats had 48 seats in the Senate and Republicans held 50. Looking at that, so we had 2 more seats left that needed to be decided. Currently, they were held by Republicans, but they had an election on January 5th. And both of these Republicans were from Georgia. At this time, because Kamala Harris was the accepted VP-elect, it was understood that Democrats would control the Senate because of her tie-breaking vote if they won both seats. Now, it's important to understand where these 2 seats were from. They were from Georgia, like I said. Georgia is a state that has reliably voted for Republicans for years before. And in 2020, for the presidential election, it was so darn close. So the notion that Democrats would somehow win both seats was a bit of a stretch. Incumbent Senators David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler were the hopes and dreams of the Republican Party in 2021, and they were against Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock, respectively. On January 5th, Election Day, to the surprise of many, the Democrats were declared the victors of the evening, and Chuck Schumer suddenly found himself as Senate Majority Leader. It was a major hit for Republicans, and in my books, officially turned Georgia into a swing state. Now, just the day after the Georgia Senate elections was January 6th. That day was slated for Congress to officially certify the Electoral College votes. Now, every 4 years, Congress has successfully met in the House chamber. Both chambers have come to the House chamber and met and successfully certified the understood results of the election in favor of the president-elect, and 2 weeks later, that president-elect would get sworn in to become the next president. This year was different, though. Going into January 6th, we were in the middle of a disputed election, mainly one-sided, and then President Trump was claiming that the election was wrongfully stolen from him and the election was rigged. When the official certification process began, there were multiple planned objections to key states like Arizona and Georgia from House Republicans. Now, don't get me wrong, in the past, we've had so many objections in so many elections. I mean, look at both elections of George Bush. Democrats were like objecting on their certification day. But what was different here was that, so in order to get an objection to be considered, a House member must formally object, and then at least one senator has to sign on to that objection, which would then prompt both houses of Congress to go to their respective chambers and debate the results that have been submitted by that state. Now, that was the senator signing on. That part does not happen very often. So that happened a lot this year. And if I'm not wrong, we started with the first objection coming for Arizona, since it is the first swing state alphabetically. Now, for the interest of time, I'll skip the other objections, but while this was happening, President Trump hosted a rally near the White House where he and his allies were listing their grievances with the overall 2020 election. They were most insistent, though, that January 6th was the last day to take back the election, because they somehow believed that Vice President Mike Pence, who presided over the certification process, retained the power to nullify the Electoral College votes and declare Trump the winner. Now, nowhere in the Constitution is that prescribed, but anyway, at this rally, people, including the president, spoke to the president's supporters for over an hour. And after it was done, and Congress was working at this time, a group of the attendants made a move through D.C. and got to the Capitol building grounds. I remember watching this happen, and I remember thinking that these people were probably just going to protest outside. But then all the news networks were showing images of these people getting onto Capitol property and then trying to make their way into the building. And within just half an hour to an hour later, the place was populating with rioters drastically. More and more and more, a seemingly endless amount of people were coming and just filling up the Capitol grounds. And Capitol police officers were struggling to hold these people back. And subsequently, many of these people made it to the entrances or made their own entrances. They broke windows, they broke doors, This is when I would say the situation reached its blankets the fan moment. Once Capitol police officers were beyond capacity, as in the rate at which they were able to stop these rioters was no longer, possible, I think this is when really rioters were able to get into the actual building. Honestly, after this point, it was just stress that had built up in every American. Members of Congress had to be taken away to a secure location from their chambers only after it became safe to take them. So really, the Capitol police officers had to clear locations, create these special passages to get to the secure location because the rioters were basically everywhere in the building. And I know that some members of Congress have said that they were just a few feet away from these rioters as they were trying to get to the secure location. And then some of the rioters were heard saying, "Hang Mike Pence," referring to the vice president who's presiding over the process, who himself had to immediately be ushered out to another secure location. Now, the offices of government officials were infiltrated, and we hadn't heard much from the president. I believe around 4 o'clock then that day, President Trump, via his Twitter account, finally urged his supporters to leave and said that he loved them. After which, the tensions did begin to calm down and people finally left. Later that evening, once the Capitol building was deemed secure for members of Congress, Congress officially met and certified the election of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, I think the next day at around 3 a.m. A few days later, after the incident, the death toll was from the riot to be reported to be 5 fatalities. In the subsequent days and months, that number grew as there were more suicides of law enforcement officials who were involved in the attack that were deeply affected by what had happened and what they had witnessed. Calls for President Trump's removal via the 25th Amendment began to grow, not just in the Democratic Party, but even between some in the Republican Party. Mike Pence did not invoke the amendment, but there was definitely reported disappointment and in some cases outrage against the president. At the time, Secretary of Transportation Elaine Chao, wife of then Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, and Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos, among others, resigned from the Trump administration in the hours and days following the attacks. Trump was removed from Facebook and Twitter as a result of his conduct, according to the companies, and January 6th will very likely go down as one of the defining moments of 2021 and really a defining moment in modern American history. Then 1 week later, President Trump was officially impeached by the Democrat-controlled House of Representatives under the single charge of incitement of insurrection. The entire Democratic caucus in the House was joined by 10 Republicans, including Representatives Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, making it the most bipartisan impeachment vote on the House's part in U.S. history. Now, the last major thing that happened in January, I would say, was all of these events culminating into this one. So on January 20th, then former Vice President Joe Biden was sworn in by Chief Justice John Roberts as the 46th President of the United States of America, becoming the oldest person to ever become president. And at this point, former Senator Kamala Harris was sworn in by Associate Justice Sonia Sotomayor as the first woman, Black American, and South Asian American to ever become Vice President of the United States. Take a listen to some of President Biden's words from that day.
To restore the soul and secure the future of America requires so much more than words. It requires the most elusive of all things in a democracy: unity. Unity. In another January, on New Year's Day in 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. When he put pen to paper, the president said, and I quote, "If my name ever goes down into history, it'll be for this act, and my whole soul is in it." My whole soul is in it. Today, on this January day, my whole soul is in this, bringing America together, uniting our people, uniting our nation. And I ask every American to join me in this cause.
As that was happening, President Donald Trump, who did not attend the inauguration, left the White House and departed to his resort, Mar-a-Lago in Florida. Here are his words on his departure.
This has been an incredible 4 years. We've accomplished so much together. I want to thank all of my family and my friends and my staff and so many other people for being here. I want to thank you for your effort, your hard work. People have no idea how hard this family worked. What we've done has been amazing by any standard. We rebuilt the United States military. We created a new force called Space Force. That in itself would be a major achievement for a regular administration. We were not a regular administration. And we just got 75 million votes, and that's a record in the history of sitting presidents. That's an all-time record by a lot, by many millions. In the history of sitting presidents, it's been really just an honor. I will always fight for you. I will be watching, I will be listening, and I will tell you that the future of this country has never been better. I wish the new administration great luck and great success. Have a good life. We will see you soon. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Okay, like I said, January was probably the most eventful month of 2021. Interesting way to start off the year. But as we move into February and March and April, interestingly, there isn't a lot that's going on. So I'm just going to consolidate this part of the year into like one set or segment. So on February 4th, House Republican from Georgia, Marjorie Taylor Greene, a very outspoken person on her beliefs, was stripped of her House committee assignments by the Democrat-controlled majority. They cited controversial comments about the Parkland and Sandy Hook school shootings, as well as advocating for violence against Democrats and supporting parts of the controversial QAnon movement as their reason for taking her committee assignments away. 5 days later, former president, at this point, Donald Trump's second impeachment trial began in the Democrat-controlled Senate. Now, Senate pro tempore, Senator Patrick Leahy presided over the trial instead of Chief Justice John Roberts. President Trump was acquitted just 4 days later after the Democrats were not able to reach the 2/3 67-vote majority in the Senate required to convict. Although they did manage to get 7 Republicans, including Mitt Romney, Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, to vote with them. And because of this, the vote ended up being 57-43, making this impeachment, the overall impeachment process, the most bipartisan impeachment process of a president in U.S. history. Now, for the next few days, all across the country, we watched as our friends in Texas and in the South in general suffered from that devastating snowstorm, which caused shortages in food, water, and heat, and left millions of people without power. All right, then moving into March, we saw probably one of the biggest accomplishments of the Biden administration with the passage of their American Rescue Plan in the Senate, setting in place $1.9 trillion in aid and stimulus to the American people as we were continuing to recover from the medical and, of course, economic detriments of the COVID-19 pandemic. After that, for a more political thing, Missouri Senator Roy Blunt announced that he wouldn't seek re-election. This was the first announcement of a series of Republican senators who announced that they would not be seeking re-election. It's an interesting phenomenon that we're seeing right now, especially of Republicans who are a little more critical of Donald Trump than others, such as Roy Blunt. And it's happening a lot in more swing state type areas where not necessarily they're swing states, but Democrats have shown their ability to win here before. It's something that I haven't covered very much on this show, but something I think I'll definitely cover in the future, especially as we're heading into the 2022 midterms next year. Later in March, there were a string of mass shootings in this country, starting with the trio shootings at spas in Georgia, which killed 8 and was found to be motivated by anti-Asian hate. That was then followed by the Boulder shootings in Colorado, which resulted in the deaths of 10 people, making it the 3rd deadliest shooting in the state's history. In Orange County, California, on March 31st, 4 people were killed in an office building shooting. With all of these incidents happening so close to each other, there were immediate calls by officials and people across the country to address the growing gun violence in the country, but also the hateful rhetoric that was fueling these events like the one in Atlanta. Now, moving into April, the CDC reported on the 2nd of April that 100 million people had received their first dose of their COVID-19 vaccine. And then through April, we saw a lot of stuff in terms of proposals from the Biden administration, but all of that really cultivated in the president's address to a joint session of Congress, his State of the Union address, which technically wasn't a State of the Union address. He gave the address on the eve of his 100th day in office, with a noticeably smaller group of people in the chamber, of course, due to COVID. In this address, he offered his proposal of a mammoth-priced $4 trillion spending plan, which would have encompassed the American Jobs Plan, the American Families Plan, and his Build Back Better agenda. Here are a few highlights from his address.
100 days since I took the oath of office and lifted my hand off our family Bible and inherited a nation, we all did, that was in crisis. The worst pandemic in a century. The worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. The worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War. Now, after just 100 days, I can report to the nation, America is on the move again. The American Jobs Plan is a blue-collar blueprint to build America. That's what it is. Good guys and women on Wall Street, but Wall Street didn't build this country. The middle class built the country, and unions built the middle class. Let's raise the minimum wage to $15. There's not a single thing, nothing beyond our capacity. We can do whatever we set our minds to if we do it together. So let's begin to get together. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you for your patience.
And to deliver the Republican rebuttal, South Carolina Senator Tim Scott was selected by his party. And if you've listened to the show, then you know that I say delivering the official rebuttal to a president's State of the Union address, or in this case, address to a joint session of Congress, whatever, delivering that official rebuttal is a great resume builder for party politics. Here are some highlights from Senator Scott's address.
Good evening. I'm Senator Tim Scott from the great state of South Carolina. We just heard President Biden's first address to Congress. Our president seems like a good man. His speech was full of good words, but President Biden promised you a specific kind of leadership. He promised to unite a nation, to lower the temperature, to govern for all Americans, no matter how we voted. This was the pitch. You just heard it again. But our nation is starving for more than empty platitudes. We need policies and progress that brings us closer together. But 3 months in, the actions of the president and his party are pulling us further and further apart. Big majorities of Americans support early voting, and big majorities support voter ID, including African Americans and Hispanics. Common sense makes common ground. But today, this conversation has collapsed. So I will close with a word from a worship song that really helped me through this past year of COVID. The music is new, but the words draw from Scripture. May the Lord bless you and keep you, make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May his presence go before you and behind you and beside you. In your weeping and your rejoicing, he is for you. May his favor be upon our nation for 1,000 generations, and your family and your children and their children. Good night, and God bless the United States of America.
Now that leads us into May. So May saw a really interesting, very 21st century-esque thing in the cyber attacks that companies in this country were facing. You might remember that the cyber attacks were actually the first segment or the first topic that this show ever covered. The Colonial Pipeline hacking happened on May 7th and shut down their entire network and cut off nearly half of the East Coast's fuel supply. We saw increased fuel prices, panic buying, hoarding, and other things as a result of this. And just to provide my 2 cents, it showed the new evolving forms of attack and warfare for the 21st century. And then heading into May 12th, we got the FDA to authorize the COVID-19 vaccine for 12 to 15-year-olds, myself included. And the following day, I had the honor to record the trailer for this show and start the Sean S. Show. And like I said numerous times, it's a dream come true, so thank you. But also on May 13th, though, the political story of the day, and more like the political story of the week or month, was when Republican Representative Liz Cheney, who you might remember voted to impeach Donald Trump, was ousted from her leadership position as the number 3 House Republican, or chairwoman of the Republican caucus, after losing a sort of no-confidence vote from members of her party. This was mainly due to her opposition to President Trump's role in the Republican Party, and her overall rejection of the claim that the 2020 election was somehow fraudulent or rigged against Donald Trump, the big lie, as she calls it. Representative Cheney was then promptly replaced by Representative Elise Stefanik from New York as the number 3 House Republican. I covered this topic extensively in Season 1 with the episodes about the House January 6th Commission, as well as the anti-Trump and the Trumpism in the GOP episode. I'd suggest you check it out. But Cheney's ousting really represented the fracture in the Republican Party caused by the disagreements over Trump's role in the party. Here are a few of Representative Cheney's words on her removal.
Today, we face a threat America has never seen before. A former president who provoked a violent attack on this Capitol in an effort to steal the election has resumed his aggressive effort to convince Americans that the election was stolen from him. He risks inciting further violence. Millions of Americans have been misled by the former president. They have heard only his words, but not the truth, as he continues to undermine our democratic process, sowing seeds of doubt about whether democracy really works at all.
Okay, for all the complexities of 2021, I can say now that we're halfway through the year, i.e. halfway through this special. A lot has happened between January and May, but the second half of the year, we started to see some really interesting changes in the Biden administration's approval and the change in the Democratic and Republican parties' agendas and strategies, COVID strains, foreign policy hiccups, and a lot more. Don't go anywhere, my friends. We'll be right back to discuss the second half of 2021 after this short break. So before we left for the break, we talked about the multitude of things that happened between January and May, the first half of 2021. Now, this half of the year, with all of the things that happened, represented the better half of the year for the Biden administration. Now, I say that because up until this point, President Biden had a rock-solid 50-plus approval rating, which generally was lower than average, but compared to Donald Trump, it was pretty good, and especially taking into account just how divided this country was and still is. The period of positive approval for a president after getting inaugurated is known as their honeymoon period, as I've said before on the show. And President Biden's honeymoon period, saw good numbers of successes and appreciation from the American people. But the next half of the year, which is from June till now, Biden has seen either declining or consistently low approval numbers. And that's been caused by several things, which we'll get to in a minute. But let's take a look at the second half of 2021. So let's start with June 4th, shall we? Of course, that was the first day that this show started. That was the first day of this show. I remember posting the first episode, and in that one, we talked about the May jobs report, the aforementioned cyber attacks, and I believe we took a look at the 2022 midterms and where they stood at that point. Those were some stories that were occurring at the time, but also another major story happening that day actually was Facebook's oversight board or oversight committee deciding to suspend Donald Trump's Facebook account, which included his Instagram, until January 2023, which would become a full 2-year ban off of the platform after the January 6th riots. This was actually going to be one of the topics for the first episode of the show, although I ultimately decided not to include this segment just because there wasn't enough reaction to the event in time for me to record and cover the topic for the first episode on the 4th. But I will say that it did highlight the growing influence and power of big tech in our country, and it's undeniable how big and influential it is. And I think that ban until 2023 for Donald Trump, a former president of the United States, will be one of the biggest examples of this influence and power that they have gained. But anyway, On June 7th, Vice President Kamala Harris traveled to Guatemala as part of the role designated to her by the president to address the root causes of the surge in migration at the southern border of this country. In this trip, she met with the presidents of Guatemala as well as Mexico, and I believe in Guatemala, she controversially told the people in these countries, quote, "Do not come, do not come." Here, take a listen to her speech in Guatemala.
And I want to emphasize that the goal of our work is to help Guatemalans find hope at home. At the same time, I want to be clear to folks in this region who are thinking about making that dangerous trek to the United States-Mexico border. Do not come. Do not come. The United States will continue to enforce our laws and secure our border. There are legal methods by which migration can and should occur.
That statement sparked a lot of criticism from both sides of the aisle, interestingly. From liberals, she was criticized for not advertising the U.S. as an open country to immigration. And I think more notable criticism came from Republicans for not traveling to the southern border to survey what was going on down there. She ended up traveling, though, to the southern border to survey what was going on with Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas. Now, in addition to VP Harris's trip, President Biden was on his own foreign policy-based schedule this month. He traveled to the G7 summit in the United Kingdom, where he met with the leaders of the G7 group, including the Prime Minister of the UK, Chancellor of Germany, and Prime Minister of Japan, among others. And there he discussed COVID, the vaccine distribution, climate change, that sort of thing. After that, he traveled to Brussels, where he was at a NATO summit. There they discussed combating Russian aggression as well as strengthening NATO. And there he also had a meeting with the president of Turkey. But I think the headline for this international trip for Biden was his meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Geneva, Switzerland. It was the first face-to-face meeting between the two leaders since Biden's inauguration as president. And they had their press conferences after the meeting, and they discussed U.S.-Russian relations. But Biden was criticized for not coming across as aggressive when meeting with President Putin, which I thought was interesting. But setting that aside, that was President Biden's first international trip as president. If you want to hear more about Harris and Biden's trips, you can check out episode 2 from season 1. Then on June 22nd, we had the New York City mayoral primary elections. You might remember I covered this primary on the show and talked about the significance of becoming mayor of New York City, how big of a profile booster that is. But in this race, the candidates there were some famous names like Eric Adams, Maya Wiley, and Andrew Yang, who many thought would actually win this election. And there were a few others who were running as well. And this was the first time that New York City was using the ranked choice voting method to select their nominee. Now, because of the mail-in ballots and the nature of ranked choice voting, we did not have a winner that night, but Andrew Yang did end up suspending his campaign, dropping out of the election. And Maya Wiley, Eric Adams, and Catherine Garcia, I believe, progressed into the next phases of the race. Then on June 24th, of course, we saw that really truly tragic collapse of the condominium building in Surfside, Florida, which resulted in the deaths of 98 people and resulted in a multi-day rescue operation. And then also on June 24th, President Biden announced that he and Senate Republicans, led by Shelley Moore Capito in negotiating, had reached a deal on his proposed infrastructure package. On the final day of the month, former President Donald Trump was at a town hall hosted by Sean Hannity, where he said that he had made up his mind on whether or not he was going to run for president in 2024. Really interesting thing there. Hannity just asked, quote, "Have you made up your mind?" end quote, to which Trump responded with a simple yes. Trump did not indicate at all whether or not he would run or not, but he did say that he had decided. Now, Trump has been flirting with another presidential bid since the moment he left office. And the fact is that there is a very real possibility that he's going to run for president again. Who knows? Maybe next year's Year in Review special, we might be talking about former President Trump announcing his candidacy for president again. And then also on this day, the House voted to create a special January 6th select committee to investigate the events of that day and the people that led up to the riot. Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger would become the only Republicans to participate in the committee after a pretty public back and forth between Republican leader Kevin McCarthy and Speaker Nancy Pelosi over the selection of representatives like Jim Jordan onto the committee. All right, on that note, heading into July, on the 6th, Eric Adams was declared the winner of the New York City Democratic primary. It was kind of assumed after that he would become the next mayor of New York City since, New York City is like that pretty super Democrat city. And then here's a not-so-political event from this year, but July saw the beginning of the much overdue and postponed Summer Olympics. I, along with so many people, I'm sure, were very excited and very happy with the beginning of the Olympics. Just for my Team USA group out there, we did win 39 golds, 41 silvers, and 33 bronzes, and we led the medal game with 113 medals. Go Team USA. All right, on July 14th, Texas legislature Democrats staged a massive walkout from their session, breaking quorum, which then allowed them to prevent a vote on a restrictive voting law that was very likely going to pass in that state. It garnered national attention since, you don't get to hear about massive legislature walkouts that often, but it did happen, and they were ultimately able to stall the vote. But they did have to go back to Texas. Of course, they have to go back home, but they did have to attend a special session. If you want to hear more about this story, check out the episode from season 1 labeled What's Going On in Texas and America with Voting Rights. Okay, July 27th saw the runoff election for a Texas House race. Now, the reason this was significant was, if I'm not wrong, there were 2 Republicans on the ballot because of the runoff system for this election. And of the 2, the Trump-backed candidate, Susan Wright, I think lost the election. And this sent shockwaves in the Republican Party. I remember covering this story here on the show and wondering with you guys about the power of the Trump endorsement. Because Miss Wright was in the favorites to win the election, she had great fundraising and a lot of support from a bunch of mainstream Republicans. So that's a little interesting tidbit from Republican Party politics in July. Then on July 30th, interesting little thing again, the Department of Justice declared that the Department of Treasury was going to have to submit former President Donald Trump's tax returns to Congress. Now, if you have looked at politics since 2015 or since Donald Trump got on the scene, you know that the words tax and returns do not go very well together for Donald Trump. So that was an interesting story there. Now, August was a huge month in politics and geopolitics, very specifically in the state of New York, and then when we take our camera and we go elsewhere, in Afghanistan. So let's get right into it. On August 3rd, New York City mandated vaccines for many indoor facilities to be able to go to these locations. You had to be vaccinated, and this was the first city in the country to do such a thing. But also on this day, after a multi-month investigation, New York Attorney General Letitia James's office released a report that basically outlined that New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, once a rising star in the party, sexually harassed 11 women. This proved to be very damaging to the governor and resulted in the beginning of his downfall. And then a week later, on August 10th, actually the season finale for this show, at this, right now, former governor now, but at that point, the current governor, Cuomo then announced that he would be resigning from his job. after basically facing total criticism from all parts of the Democratic Party, going as high as Speaker Nancy Pelosi and even President Biden. He said that he would be leaving his job 2 weeks after the day he announced on the 24th of August. Here's the governor's statement on his resignation.
This is one of the most challenging times for government in a generation. Government really needs to function today. Government needs to perform. It is a matter of life and death, government operations. And wasting energy on distractions is the last thing that state government should be doing. And I cannot be the cause of that. New York tough means New York loving. And I love New York. And I love you. And everything I have ever done has been motivated by that love. And I would never want to be unhelpful in any way. And I think that given the circumstances, the best way I can help now is if I step aside and let government get back to governing. And therefore, that's what I'll do, because I work for you. And doing the right thing is doing the right thing for you. Because as we say, it's not about me, it's about we. Kathy Hochul, my lieutenant governor, is smart and competent. This transition must be seamless. We have a lot going on. I'm very worried about the Delta variant, and so should you be. But she can come up to speed quickly, and my resignation will be effective in 14 days.
Also on this day, the Senate voted to pass the $1.2 trillion compromise infrastructure package in a vote of 69-30, which I believe is in fact one of the biggest spending packages on infrastructure, and I think just spending packages in general in U.S. history. And then the following day, the Senate voted to pass the $3.5 trillion reconciliation package, which pretty much had the entire Democrat wish list and the Biden agenda. Now, for all of August, we saw a lot of stories, but one we were also watching, I think even from the beginning of May, really, was the U.S.'s withdrawal from the country of Afghanistan, where we've been involved militarily and politically for over 20 years. President Trump, in his last few months in office, announced that the U.S. was going to be leaving Afghanistan after a negotiated deal with the Taliban. President Biden inherited this deal and then set a firm date for August 30th for the complete pullout and withdrawal from Afghanistan. President Biden repeatedly tried to reassure the American people and the American public and really the world that the U.S. withdrawal was going to be very smooth and very simple. That's what he kept saying. However, by August 15th, the whole world was watching as the Taliban was taking province after province without much of a fight, I must say, and made its way to Kabul, the capital of Afghanistan. On August 15th, President Ashraf Ghani was reported to have fled the country, and the Afghan military of 300,000 was not doing the best job of responding to the Taliban's increasing likeliness of taking over the country. So all of this really contributed to the relatively simple and easy takeover and worsening and declining situation for Afghanistan. And as I've said before, made it a lot easier for the Taliban to really just take over Afghanistan. And another thing I've said on this show is that the Taliban are no friend of America. They do not really fit with American values. They are very draconian in their policies and governing, and they have a very, very strict interpretation of their religion, Islam, which allows them to justify things, which they use to justify, rather, things like denying their people, specifically women, basic freedoms and liberties. They execute people for a variety of even minor crimes. They ban music, and they forbid foreign and Western influence in their country. So the Taliban coming into Afghanistan is, of course, not in U.S. interests. After this, the main mission was then to rescue the diplomatic team of the United States in Kabul, as well as service members and people who in Afghanistan, Afghan people who helped the United States military while we were there. Tragically, in this process, many died, including 13 U.S. service members who were at a part of Hamid Karzai Airport that was attacked by an ISIS bomber with a suicide vest. This event really rocked the entire Biden administration's national security team, and a direct ramification was the president's drop in approval ratings, and therefore the end of his honeymoon period. According to 538, President Biden's honeymoon period officially ended on August 30th. The events in Afghanistan are going to go down in U.S. history as really a failure, something similar to Vietnam. And it will be one of the defining moments of 2021 and the Biden presidency in general. Just based on what we saw, part of the things that happened, there is definitely some blame on the Biden administration, but there were so many other factors involved. And if you want to hear more about this story and those factors, check out the season 2 premiere, where I go way more in depth into this story. But anyway, back here at home, on August 24th, Andrew Cuomo's resignation became official, and Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul succeeded him to become the first female governor of New York State. Then, on September 9th, President Biden issued an executive order mandating vaccines for up to 100 million private sector workers in an effort to get more vaccinations to prevent the spread of COVID. On September 14th, there was a major recall election in California to recall their incumbent governor, Gavin Newsom, after Republicans in his state were able to trigger one once he was caught not following his own COVID prevention guidelines. He defeated the recall, and he's still the governor right now. Then on September 23rd, the House January 6th committee voted to issue the first of many subpoenas. And then taking a massive jump to October 19th, the House committee actually voted to hold former Trump advisor Steve Bannon in criminal contempt for not following one of the committee's issued subpoenas against him. So, guys, not a lot happened in October, politically speaking. But in November, on the 2nd, voters in New Jersey and Virginia headed to the polls to vote for their governor. And a wide variety of other special elections and mayoral elections and local elections were held this year. So voters in Virginia surprised the entire nation when they elected Republican Glenn Youngkin as their next governor and Winsome Sears as their next lieutenant governor. This delivered a major blow to Democrats. And then in New Jersey, their gubernatorial election did result in the incumbent Democrat governor, Phil Murphy, keeping his job, but an election that was remarkably close. I believe we were not able to call this election until the day after, in the afternoon or in the evening, I think. But some other races that occurred in the country, Shontel Brown was elected to Ohio 11, and Mike Carey was elected to Ohio 15. And New York City voters elected Eric Adams as their next mayor, as was expected. Then on November 5th, the House voted to pass the $1.2 trillion infrastructure package, and after the president signed it, it did become law a few days later, and we got a huge infrastructure spending plan put in place. On November 19th, interesting little fact here, Vice President Kamala Harris served as acting President Kamala Harris for about an hour and a half while President Biden was undergoing a routine medical procedure, making her the first woman to ever have presidential powers in U.S. history. Then, with rising inflation and gas prices, the Biden administration announced that they would be releasing 50 million barrels of oil from our strategic reserves to help stabilize gas prices. Then on November 30th, President Trump's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, announced that he would be cooperating with the House January 6th committee, which really, this is a notable story because it shocked a lot of people because he's one of the last people anybody would expect would cooperate with this committee. Then on December 1st, the CDC reported the first case of the very highly, highly contagious Omicron variant. And then, Omicron is really big right now. A bunch of people are getting the Omicron variant. I know so many people that are getting COVID right now. So, and it all started on December 1st. That's mind-blowing. But anyway, on December 7th, Mark Meadows then announced, he first announced on November 30th that he would be cooperating. Then on December 7th, Mark Meadows announced that he would cease cooperation with the January 6th committee, a little more in line with what most people thought he would do. The following day, the committee announced that they would pursue criminal contempt proceedings similar to Bannon for not cooperating with the committee, and they did so on December 14th. The whole House voted to do so, and this actually made Mark Meadows, I believe, the first former U.S. representative since I think 1830 or something to be held in criminal contempt by the House. So that was interesting. And then also on this day, the committee actually released a series of texts that were received by Mark Meadows during the Capitol siege as it was happening. And these were texts from people like Laura Ingraham, Sean Hannity, Don Jr. There were pretty big names that were texting Mark Meadows, urging him to get the president to stop. Here is Representative Liz Cheney, vice chair of the committee, reading some of those texts.
Mr. Meadows received numerous text messages, which he has produced without any privilege claim, imploring that Mr. Trump take the specific action we all knew his duty required. These text messages leave no doubt the White House knew exactly what was happening here at the Capitol. One text Mr. Meadows received said, quote, "We are under siege here at the Capitol." Another, quote, "They have breached the Capitol." Dozens of texts, including from Trump administration officials, urged immediate action by the president. Quote, "POTUS has to come out firmly and tell the protesters to dissipate. Someone is going to get killed." According to the records, multiple Fox News hosts knew the president needed to act immediately. They texted Mr. Meadows, quote, "Mark, the president needs to tell people in the Capitol to go home. This is hurting all of us. He is destroying his legacy," Laura Ingraham wrote. "Please get him on TV. Destroying everything you have accomplished," Brian Kilmeade texted. Quote, "Can he make a statement? Ask people to leave the Capitol," Sean Hannity urged. Donald Trump Jr. texted again and again, urging action by the president. Quote, "We need an Oval Office address. He has to lead now. It has gone too far and gotten out of hand," end quote.
On December 10th, we saw those really devastating tornadoes in the Midwest, which resulted in a lot of damage in the region, as well as the deaths of 94 people, a lot of whom were from Kentucky. Now, guys, that does wrap up all the biggest stories in 2021. Wow, that's a lot. If you made it through the whole thing, or maybe skipped through bits, or scrubbed all the way till this point, well, great job making it through the whole episode and reminiscing the year 2021. I did say I would give some of my own insight to what I think is going to happen in 2022. Now, all of us, including myself, would like this to end already, right? So I'll be brief. Now, what I expect from 2022 is actually a good amount. So I'd be watching Republican primaries for the 2022 elections to see what kinds of Republicans are going to contest in the 2022 midterms. Trump versus non-Trump candidates. I'd want to see how many incumbent Republicans are actually booted out in a Republican primary, because it's a bit of an interesting thing, because seeing the types of Republicans that might end up in the 2022 midterms, who might even win, could show an interesting dynamic for Trump versus non-Trump Republicans, and could very well shape up a lot of the 2024 election. Because again, the 2024 election is either going to be Donald Trump running for re-election again, or a search for a Trump successor. So it's important to watch. What types of Republicans are winning in the primaries. I'd also be keen to watch how the Biden agenda does next year, since that's kind of struggling right now. I believe on Face the Nation, a journalist put it as it being on life support, which is true, because Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia said that he would be cutting ties with support for the bill, which delivered a major blow. So right now, the Biden administration is scrambling to get either Joe Manchin or just one more vote to help their agenda. And seeing that there are predictions right now that Republicans might take back control of the House or Senate, this might just be the last year, maybe for the entire Biden presidency, or maybe for a while at least, that they can get anything like Build Back Better passed. Then foreign policy-wise, I would be watching Russia and their contact with Ukraine. It's well known by this point that Russia is very interested in invading the country of Ukraine. And I believe Putin hasn't actually made up his mind on whether or not he wants to invade the country. But that would be important to watch, especially going into next year, early next year, to see if Putin makes up his mind. And then I would also be watching China and how the Biden administration deals with their growing aggression, as well as their interactions with Taiwan, and in general their actions in the South China Sea area. Then 2024-wise, I would most certainly be watching Donald Trump for sure. There's a good chance, like I said earlier, that a year from now we could be talking about candidate for president again, Donald Trump. Now, before I go, I'd like to once again thank you for your time this year and for this special, and just thank you for the faith that you have put into this show. I've truly been honored to report political stories and events to you all through this podcast, so thank you. And as I leave you all, I want to wish you, your family, and your friends a very happy, happy New Year from the Sean S. Show. Thank you so much for your time today. I know it was a very long episode, but if you did like my commentary, then please do share this episode and all the others with your friends and family. Do us a favor and follow at The Sean S. Show on Twitter and Instagram. It helps out a lot. And check out TheSeanSShow.com for a central location for all things The Sean S. Show. Thank you so much for your time today and for this year. Happy New Year to all of you, and I'll see you guys in 2022. Bye.